Hello and welcome to Tales from the Hut and Hangar. This is a spin-off series which is going to be my 6 aviation images. So the other podcast is when we chat to people, and then this one will be bolted onto it, or people will just do this one if they just want to show images and don't want to sit there boring everybody for ages.
Yeah, for ages, like I've been doing.
So my first victim again is Rick Lee, as you might be sick of him.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, at least the pictures are.
So we're going to go through 6 images that mean something to Rick. He's turned up at my place with quite a few. We're in my shed in my back garden recording this on a lovely sunny hot day in September, which is really nice. I'm going to go through each image and Rick can tell us about it, and as we speak about it, it'll be on the screen. So the first one we've got is a bear, which is always fascinating when I spoke to Rick about it. They used to intercept Russian bears when he was in the RAF. And the first picture, which is on the screen now, Rick will go into what it was about and when he did it. And
yeah, okay. As the picture shows, it was taken in January 1974 when I was up in Scotland on 23 Squadron. I'd been flying Lightnings for about 7 years, and this last tour on 23 Squadron enabled me to do quick readiness alert, which you've all seen on television, I'm sure, where we scrambled to intercept aeroplanes that are entering our ADRs. Anyway, this particular picture is a Russian bear, which you see on the television now. That's happening in Ukraine. These big bombers that are being intercepted by our frontline fighters now. This one is at 28,000 feet. I'd 600 miles north of Scotland, and I'd come out with a Victor tanker for about an hour and a half to get into this position, and followed him as he went through our ADR airspace, air defence region. He was on his way to Cuba, I reckon, to pick up some cigars for the Khrushchev. I wasn't Khrushchev. They used to go regularly out into the Atlantic. Excuse me. You'll see on this one it's got a big radome. The Bear Delta was one of the most prolific of the bears.
There's many variants of them, though, aren't there?
There are about 3 or 4. One's a photographic one, which is the white-bellied one, which we've also got pictures of. But this one, as you'll see, it's got a big radar underneath its tummy, under its belly, and this would liaise with surface ships, Russian ships, and also submarines, and can send information to surface vessels for launching their missiles on the wing. I think I mentioned a few missiles on the last one, and I said ship Cresters, which isn't an actual missile. They begin with K, the same as some of the ships, but anyway, the Kennel, the Kitchen were things, supersonic missiles and subsonic missiles that could be launched from bears to surface vessels. It's got an in-flight refueling probe on the front, as you can see, and the fun about intercepting these was that the crew at the back, which was anything up to 10 or 12 I think, would come out to the cupolas on the side, the plastic things, and wave at you and show you pictures of Playboy, whereas the guy in the front left-hand seat, he never acknowledged you were there, and we had to stick very closely to our international rules, which were basically 200 to 300 yards over on the left. This picture is probably breaking them slightly. I'm a little bit closer and underneath, but I wanted to get some pictures of the different radars and cupolas and things like that.
So on there it says restricted, obviously.
Yes.
You'll be shot if they found out you had that picture.
Yeah.
We'll let it go. No one's going to watch this anyway, so don't worry about it.
Anyway, that's a bear. They've already been around then.
How old? They've been 50s?
Yeah, they've been around such long. But
they're a bit like the B-52, really, aren't they? Just go on and on and on.
Yeah. They haven't re-engined them, not I know of. They've still got the Tupolev. We've got contra-rotating propellers.
Because they're bloody fast as well, aren't they?
I did quite a few interceptions at night, and you had to come up behind them, and they would turn off their lights, and you'd close on your radar in the Lightning, which allowed you to get into 200 or 300 yards if there was no moon or no stars, even in cloud,
Wow.
you could close all the way up on a vis-ident. It was quite, what's the word, stressful getting
Yeah.
in that close, because these things are 100.
And this is a regular thing every night, every day, when it all the
No,
time?
no, they're quite rare. But
Oh, I thought they were
during
every
an
time.
exercise, or
Yeah.
if there was a NATO exercise in the,
They'd be
in
out
the
spying.
Atlantic, they'd be out spying.
Yeah.
But there was aeroplanes ready to go up there any stage, Lightnings. At night, they did a couple of nasty things. They'd shine a very, very bright torch up, like a light, what do we call, spotlight, through
Yeah.
one of the cupolas at the back. And I must have been getting a little nervous, the guy at the back, because I reckon I was 200 or 300 yards closing before I was going to move out, once I'd visually picked him up against the skyline and got my night vision. And all of a sudden a huge searchlight shone into the cockpit and blinded me, and I had to pull away for some time, for about a minute or so, and then re-attack, if you like, and sit up on the left wing. And if during the daylight, sometimes the captain would reduce the speed of the aeroplane. You're flying at round about 250 knots, 230, 40 knots in the Lightning. He'd slow down further and further and further, and the Lightning would eventually start to reach round about 190 knots, and then he'd turn towards you.
Cheeky.
And very cheeky. But you were aware that he was slowing down, and he'd probably do that. So they were always pretty aggressive. Their guns, 27mm in the tail, were always following as you came in.
Right. So in some ways it was the only time you really saw the enemy at the time.
Very much so.
But exciting times.
Pictures you've seen in my logbook of submarines and ships in the Mediterranean, and even then they were always slightly aggressive, firing varied pistols at you and so on and so forth.
Yes,
but that was my job, generally speaking, which was intercepting Russian aeroplanes.
What year roughly was that?
74.
74.
That was June,
okay.
I think it's on there.
Oh yeah. Duh, it's on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a great picture to start with.
Yeah. Okay, I was very lucky to be asked to actually go for a flight in the Mosquito, the British Aerospace Mosquito, in 1988. The actual registration was Romeo Romeo 299, which aficionados will probably remember that it did crash and kill the pilot some years later. However, this story was a reunion in the officers' mess at RAF Wattisham, where I'd been there on 2 tours, and I was going to a reunion of 74 Squadron. They were flying Phantoms. I knew the boss of 74 Squadron, who was flying Phantoms. I never flew the Phantom apart from a ride in the back, and he invited me to a reunion, and I drove over from Yeovilton, where I was flying the Hunters as a civilian, and got into the bar late at night. I got there around about 9:30, and everybody was happily sloshed. They'd been drinking for 3 hours, and I went into the bar, and it was full of people I haven't seen, some of them for 15-20 years. I'd spent some time in Australia, and I was just contemplating getting to the bar and catching up when a guy called Tony Craig, who was an engineering officer in Singapore in the late 60s on Lightnings, but he also flew the Lightning. He was a very good pilot and an engineer. And he stood in front of me and he said, "Rick, how are you?" And I hadn't seen him for literally almost 20 years. And he said, don't get pissed. And I said, "Well, fine, okay, but I'm late anyway." He said, "Well, have one, but I want somebody sober tomorrow morning to help me navigate an aeroplane." And I had no idea what the aeroplane was.
Wow.
I didn't know, where Tony had been or what he was doing. And he went out and he said, "Look, I'm going to bed. Please, I can't find anybody that I want to put in the aeroplane tomorrow." And I thought, it must be an executive jet or something. Or I really hadn't a clue what it was. Anyway, I had a beer and went to bed. The next morning at 8 o'clock, he said 8:30 outside Hangar 1. And I left the bar he was really serious about getting somebody that was sober. Anyway, I got out there, and it was a mosquito. I just I pinched myself. I really
Unbelievable.
did. I think somebody had mentioned it, and I just poo-pooed it. And I said, "Oh, don't be silly, you know."
What a lovely surprise.
And, yeah, it was a surprise. And I didn't have time to talk to Tony. The bar was full of people. Anyway, he told me before we got on board, we had about a half an hour of briefing. And I said, "Wow, this is fantastic." He said, "You're doing a job. You're navigating. We have to navigate this mosquito under a cold front which was arriving. The weather was forecast to be absolute rubbish halfway through the morning." And he said, "I've got to do an air show at Coltershall." I went, "What? In this?" He said, "And then we have to somehow get underneath cloud. I can't go IMC, you know, instrument conditions. We've got to stay VMC. But I think we can navigate underneath and go and fly over a place where they made them."
Wow.
Salisbury Hall. And I went, "What's the big deal?" He said, "Well, it's 50-year anniversary of the first mosquito being built."
That's amazing.
And I felt a bit embarrassed that I didn't know much about the mosquito, other than seeing that mosquito film.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, anyway, so I got the map, climbed up after him, up the top. Somebody closed the door underneath, and sat in this little seat, slightly set back, and there were these two big Merlin propellers outside. It was really amazing. I was still pinching myself. And we took off, and we got to Coltershall, which is pretty quick from Watersham. He did this air show, wingovers, really fantastic. And while he was going around these wingovers, he was saying the best thing to do is not push negative G on a Merlin, and I'd read a bit about that in Spitfires. And he said the engine can, you know, fuel starvation. And he did an air show for about 8 or 10 minutes, and then we headed off towards this approaching front, and you could see the weather was changing. And we got down to quite low, actually, at one stage. We started off at 250, 300 feet, and we got lower and lower, and I was following railway lines on the map, and he'd put a few lines on the map. And
wartime special then, really.
And he was just concentrating. He was concentrating, you know, on staying out of cloud. And I was sort of shouting instructions left, right, a bit. It wasn't much because he knew roughly where he was going. It got a bit tense towards the end on that. Anyway, we eventually saw this front coming, and we got underneath. A bit of rain. At one stage, I thought, are we going to get through? The visibility got worse. And then we pulled up into clear airspace. It was magic, and we climbed. And the next amazing thing that happened was we get up to about 8,000-9,000 feet on the radio, and he started formating and joining another mosquito.
Really? God.
And it was belonging to an American guy whose name escapes me, millionaire, AK something. Anyway, I should have researched this, I'm sorry, Keith. But anyway, we joined up on this other millionaire-owned mosquito that had come over specifically for this formation, and he formated on Tony for a bit, and I'm sitting on the right hand side, so I could see him across in formation. And we had to go through a few calls on the radio at various airfields, and the moment they said mosquito formation, every single airfield that we called said, "Can you do a flyby? Can you do a flyby?"
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm not surprised.
But we were on a time limit because we had to get to this farm. And again, I had really no idea of this, what was happening at this farm. And we got down low level again, and the other mosquitoes on our left wing, and I'm still sort of navigating, my thumb on the line on a piece of, on the map. And Tony is saying to me, are we on track? Are we on track? And he's concentrating. And I said, I'm absolutely certain it's not long, about another minute. And then I saw slightly to the right, about 5 degrees off the nose, a light flashing. In fact, there were people on the roof of this farm taking flash photographs. And I just adjusted him a little bit, about 5 degrees to the right. We went right over this farmyard. It was a shed.
Wow.
And there were all these air marshals and people from all around the world that had come there to this secret place that they built the first mosquito. And then it was taken away.
I wonder if there's a YouTube clip of that. It must be.
Well, there were
Have a
there were
little
photographs
search.
going off.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we did an orbit and went round again.
All right.
Quite amazing. And the other aeroplane peeled off and went somewhere else, and he had to get back to his base in Chester,
Yeah.
where the British Aerospace. He was a test pilot for British Aerospace.
All right.
Testing the wings on the things they were flying, and this was his perk, flying
Wow.
this Mosquito.
What a perk that is.
And he said, I've got to go back. And he told me that he was going to Chester. And I said, what about my Volkswagen? I'm going to get home, back to Yeovil. He
Yeah.
said, don't worry about it. I'll bring you back. And I didn't have any problems with that. So we flew into Wales. It was beautiful. The weather had gone through, and he was going down the valleys in Wales. It was like going into Norway and
A flight of dreams, following railway lines, flying at a few hundred feet.
Honestly, it really was one of the most amazing stories.
So the photograph, who took that photograph? Was that the actual flight or just a photograph?
No, that's
of
a picture I picked up
Oh,
later
right, okay.
on.
Brilliant.
And we landed at this airfield, and I spent the night with Tony. I still keep in touch with him. The next day we jumped into an executive jet. He put me in the left-hand seat, and we flew back to Watersham.
So it was
we did a running and brake in this twin-engine.
a really enjoyable experience.
It was unbelievable.
Brilliant. Okay.
A Mosquito.
Excellent. Okay, now on to the third picture, which is just very interesting. Over to you, Rick. Explain.
Well, yeah. This picture is of 77 Squadron. You can see the pilots in the bottom left-hand corner. I took the pictures, so I'm not down there, the youngsters. And this is Alice Springs. And
In Australia.
in Australia, yeah. And we've flown in 77 Squadron on our way to Learmonth. It's known for its base there, which is an American base with this amazing, very, very low frequency aerial that goes up about 1,500, 2,000 feet.
Yeah.
And it goes boom, boom, and it sends out messages to nuclear submarines to go and kill Russians or Chinese or whatever. So it's got a huge runway there, which is good, which is why we go over there to protect it in case, and it's also got on the top left-hand corner there was where they did some of the first nuclear bomb in Australia. One of them went off on an island. So the whole thing is quite a secret little place. But when I say that, the Aussies don't get sort of clear to go onto these bases.
Right.
Most of them. Anyway, we took our squadron, and we have no in-flight refueling on our Mirages, and they didn't have any in-flight refueling capabilities, so we had to fly for a couple of hours up at round about the top 40,000 feet in pairs, stern round about 20 miles, and fly to Central Australia to refuel. And you can see in the background nothing, which is a straight line, which is the desert.
I know it looks like it's a white bit of photograph, but it's just dead, isn't it? Flat.
Alice Springs again is all American, as you probably all know, that we've got very secure area, and the Americans love Australia for that.
Is that an Australian Herc there or American?
That's a good question. I haven't even noticed that.
Yeah, just
I think that's an Aussie one.
Yeah.
And it's also the place for a big radar place where the satellites, and so not far away from there, about 4 or 5 miles away, just outside the airport, there's a very secret base which is manned by about 400 Americans with their big circular domes like we had up in Yorkshire, looking and collecting all the satellites that came across Central Australia.
So where do you take this photo? You're quite elevated, aren't you?
I was up in air traffic control taking that picture.
So was that quite rare seeing that many together, or you just thought that's a good shot?
Just coming into Alice Springs, because we didn't do the journey very often, and I'd actually lived there for 5 years, flying hot air balloons and tiger moths and gliders. So I thought this particular picture for me shows the fast end of my time in Alice Springs.
It's a really good, really nice photograph, that.
And the aeroplanes themselves, I don't think there's a two-seater there, I can't see. Yes, there is a two-seater there.
Yeah.
But
okay. Yeah, it was a really good picture, that.
And once we got to the place that we were going to, Learmonth, we then did operations intercepts and flying around on an exercise. So that was on our way, halfway.
Yeah, it's a nice snapshot of your career, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I basically loved Alice Springs. It was a fantastic place. You didn't get much weather there. It hardly ever rained. When it did, it just flooded.
Yeah.
And they had a river going through for about a week, and then it disappeared for another couple of years maybe.
Yeah, right.
And but I really enjoyed flying hot air balloons. All that area there, I used to come around the edge and go out into the bush and fly south of the airfield.
Nothing to hit in a hot air balloon. All right, brilliant. Thanks. Let's go with that. Okay, now we're going on to the fourth picture, which is a lovely shot of a Spitfire with Rick's little smiley face shining out. And while I continue, there's a bloke cutting the grass in the background.
Oh, yes, he's still there.
But wherever we go, there's a noise creeping up in the background. Anyway, you're too transfixed by the rubbish we're coming out with. Over to you, Rick.
Okay, fine. Yes, this picture was taken in Florida at the Sun and Fun in 2004, and it was printed in the EAA Sport Aviation magazine, which is the #1 sport aviation magazine in America, I might say, 2 years later.
All right.
Which was really, I think, a little bit of jealousy on the part of the people in America who were trying to flog kit airplanes, which this Spitfire is,
right.
Mark 26.
Yeah.
And they had their Mustangs, and they had some fabulous aeroplanes. So, although when we turned up there with this aeroplane, we'd taken it from Australia in a box, and we'd sold our first one in America to a gentleman called Muth. Now, the number, the Muth, M-U-T-H, there it is. And if you have this magazine, the Sport Mag, you'll see me on the front, spitting image it's got on the front. And there's just on the other side of the picture that you see, there's a bit, the dealer, Craig Muth, Supermarine founder Mike Sullivan, and retired RAF test pilot, which is a lie, because I never passed the test pilot school. But they put it in, and I never said I was a test pilot, but I did a lot of test flying, I must say. Richard Lee, showing off the Spitfire. Well, we didn't have to show it off much because it was very, very popular.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
And it was all aluminium, whereas a lot of the kit aeroplanes there were fiberglass, which were fine, especially the Mustang, which was a sort of competition. Of course, the RV of aeroplanes is fantastic, and they're all fiberglass, but the actual aeroplane is a two-seater. You can see the seat behind me. I flew a couple of people over there. We'd actually put it together at Craig Muth's airfield called Lakeland, which is just south of where the Sun and Fun is, and I flew him in the back seat, and then eventually I put him in the front seat. I didn't go in the back when he flew it, and he was basically checked out to fly it, and he did very well. But on the day of the show, I flew for about 5 minutes into the circuit at the Sun and Fun, and wow, that's my first air show in America. There were 3 or 4 different routes that one had to fly. There was dozens, hundreds of airplanes, and it was quite popular. I was going to go in the place where they kept the real Spitfires and the Hurricanes, but we had our own little slot in between the two, and we were inundated by people very interested in Mike Sullivan's aeroplane. Yeah. This picture is taken by a chap called Levy, Howard Levy, a very famous photographer. He died in 2010, but he was taking pictures of Spitfires all through the Second World War. He travelled, his Spitfire was his favourite aeroplane. I didn't know Howard Levy at all from a bar of soap. He just turned up at the briefing and said, and he was a lovely man, and probably in his middle 70s, and he was in this Cessna leaning out of the door and giving me indications and pointing his camera down, and it was pretty obvious he'd done a lot of air-to-air photography. Right, brilliant. And I came up, and as you can see from the picture, he got it quite nicely. We flew the air show for a couple of days, and a few other pictures were taken by Howard, and he wrote nicely in my logbook that he really enjoyed taking pictures of a kit aeroplane Spitfire. It was
Right.
just magic.
So that was the icing on the cake after you helped develop it and take it to America.
And as it was the
pick it
first
up.
one, and we sold, after that the production went, and I actually did test flying of the 3 different engine ones with the Isuzu's 6-cylinder engine, which was nearly 300 horsepower, maybe just a bit over, and then they had a V8 in them. The aeroplane became the 26B, and we actually increased the length slightly. The wings stayed the same, but it was just a magical aeroplane to fly, and they were going for $190,000 Australian dollars then. Now you're looking at the same in pounds.
Right.
We recently lost one, as you probably know from the news, that
Yeah.
one, somebody from Ensign, where they make them, unfortunately got into difficulties, and he didn't survive a crash. They're still investigating that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It was a really nice photograph, that.
It is, and this is the Second World War markings, as you can see.
Yeah, with a silver spinner, which
Yes.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, it was rather funny because I flew around Florida. A lot of people, having seen it do the show at Sun and Fun, phoned up and said, "Will you bring it in?" And I took it to a few provincial small airfields around Florida, and I'd land there, and people would walk up and say, "Gee, I always thought they were a little bit bigger than this." You know, and they're looking at me in the cockpit saying, I said, "Yeah, well, they are,
but in the air, fantastic, isn't it?"
It's certainly, I think that's one of the best pictures that was ever taken of the Spitfire.
Yeah, it's great.
It's because it's got this amazing bloke inside.
Yeah, and you can see his little smiley face.
No, I had. Yes, that's it.
That's
Good.
really good.
Okay.
Nice one. Right, moving on to the next picture, which is number 5, if I'm counting correctly, which is a real interesting mishmash of vehicles and huts.
Two
and
caravans.
2 caravans, a tree. There's some mountains in the background.
Yeah,
and
an F250.
Oh, right.
My Land Rover, and 2 caravans.
A really hot
and a Tiger Moth.
A really hot caravan. I bet. I bet it's bloody hot in there.
Oh God, yes.
Over to you, Rick. Explain.
Okay. Well, this is taken from a town called Quorn.
Quorn on the Cob.
Yeah, and you can buy mince called as exactly the same name, which my wife and I bought some.
Being a vegetarian, yes, I've had
it's
some
a
of that.
vegetarian mince. It's the Flinders. There's some range of mountains there, and it's on a main railway line.
Is that bang smack in the middle of Oz, or
no? This is a long way south of Alice Springs.
Oh, okay.
And it's I should have done a bit of research on this. Yeah, it's basically about 700 or 800 kilometres south of Alice Springs, Quorn. And in the picture you can see from the left an F250 which belongs to Captain Boggles, then the biplane which we both flew with people, then Boggles's caravan. Then there's, I'm not sure what that's a trailer. I think that's our little fireplace that I built.
Right.
That's my caravan in front of my Land Rover, which I'd been using for some years up in Alice Springs in my own balloon company. I basically became a barnstormer, and I was down at Quorn after having been given the job with Captain Boggles, and I was named Captain Biggles, and he had something like no kidding. It's somewhere between 10 and 15,000 hours on biplanes.
You sure got it right this time.
Yeah, it really was. I got it right.
What makes me, when all these photographs you got, is just the diversity and the difference in all your flying, from flying high tech, death-defying, killing jets.
Yeah, well,
and then to a dust bowl and an old fabric biplane.
Well, I just spent £100,000 of a company that went bust, as you'll see from my ballooning pictures. That, you know, and I'd basically started ballooning when I'd left Fradu Flying Hunters.
Yeah.
And I got 1,000 hours on balloons. But this was my attempt, having flown for 2 years in Alice Springs, flying hot air balloons from one of the biggest companies in the world. I decided that I was going to try and start my own, but I had to cut it down because it was basically non-viable financially. And I'd heard about Captain Boggles, and he'd come up to Alice Springs, as you heard on that long one, and flew my girlfriend. Anyway, and I phoned him up, and I was determined to try and get back into flying again with wings, without the balloon. And he gave me the job, and he told me to come down. And did I have somewhere to sleep? And I said, yes, I've got a caravan. He said, perfect. So I've just realised what that thing is to the left of my caravan. It is in fact a balloon. It's a 160 Cameron, which a friend of mine lent to me. So I had another balloon there, and I did some flying alongside in the morning. So
this was the road show that used to travel around, is it?
Now
basically?
what this place here is the field that we'd been there, and as you can see, we've sort of established ourselves. If you could see behind the back there, you'd see a fireplace I built out of rocks. So we were there around about 2.5-3 weeks, and it was near a road. It was about half a mile away, and it was really out bush, but it was a asphalt road leading along the mountains you see in the difference, or the hills, down to another resort. And we had a sign out there, flying, come and fly a biplane, that sort of thing. And then we got the farmer. He allowed us we went in first, and we found a place that was 200 or 300 yards long where we could land, and then we asked it if we could make that into a strip from the local farmer. As you can see, it doesn't have any cows around, and there's no sheep, so it was basically just a rocky place.
Odd kangaroo, is it?
But as the junior pilot,
yes,
Biggles had to pick most of the stones up, and you can just see the edge of the airstrip there.
Brilliant.
Okay, so we set up and we started flying. And
how much did you charge a flight then, roughly?
Then it was we had the Mind Boggler, which we talked about before. And I wasn't allowed to do them. I mean, I'm still
that's with the bog roll, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, toilet roll out. But they were anywhere from a 5-10 minute flight, depending on how sick they felt. No, we had a 10-minute flight. I think that was $40-50, and then it would go all the way up to a Mind Boggler, which was, by the time it climbed up to 3,000 feet and through the toilet roll out, it was around about a 15 to 20 minute flight, but not much more than.
No.
If they looked rich, if they were in a nice bit, you would put the price up.
Oh, that's right.
But it was flexible.
Good fun though.
It was extremely good fun, and I really enjoyed it. But that wasn't our base. His base was at a place called Robe, R-O-B-E, and he would. That was on the south coast. It was a fishing village, mostly lobsters and things like that. Beautiful place, and he had a hangar there with another tiger moth, and I hadn't realised he had another tiger moth, but when he employed me and I had to fly round and round that paddock there. They call them paddocks in Australia. I'm out a dozen times with him sitting in the front, and we didn't have any two-way communications apart from a bang on the head if he was in the back. And he just would point and say, go round again, and it wasn't until I'd actually managed to land it three-pointed on this ground and done a good circuit that he put his thumbs up. So I did my training in that tiger moth. I'd already got a commercial license flying Cessna 206s, 210s up in Alice Springs, and that was fun, flying backwards and forwards to Ayers Rock. It was a 2-hour flight, but this was much more fun. And when we went down to Robe, we established ourselves there for a year. I flew at Robe, and we lived in a hangar. I took my caravan into the back of the hangar, so I had the hangar. We all lived inside the hangar in our 2 caravans, and inside was another tiger moth. And eventually we became a team, and he wanted to go to the local air shows and do a little bit of formation aerobatics. And as experienced as Captain Boggles was, we started off our flying with me flying as the leader and Captain Boggles on my wing. I'd obviously done quite a bit in my career in the Air Force, and I tried to give him the basics of how to join and the hand signs that I gave him. And he ummed and ahed and listened and everything, but it became pretty apparent after a couple of sorties that Captain Boggles had never really been given any sort of information that he was going to retain, because he had his own way of doing things.
Right.
So I would suddenly find out where would he be, and he'd be drifting around the place and coming quite close, and I could feel him as he went underneath the backside, and I hadn't given him, a signal or something. And after a couple of times when I thought, this is a bit dodgy, I sat down with him one evening inside the hangar and said, Boggles, it's so much more difficult leading. And he went, what? I said, oh yeah, in the military only the most experienced pilots lead. And he went, really? I said, yeah, and you've got 10,000 hours more than I have,
Yeah.
Why don't you do the leading? And he went, oh, okay then.
So
I managed to get him so that and I said, I wouldn't move, and he was very nice about it, but self-preservation came in. It was just a little bit too difficult.
Right. So good fun times then, really.
Oh, wonderful time.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Right, over to the final picture now, which is a man in a basket.
Explain
the picture, please, Rick.
Okay. Well, I basically 1989, 1990, and that's my father, Kenneth Albert Lee, ex-warrant officer in the Air Force, born in 1913, so he'll be round about 80s there, I think. And he'd arrived from Australia to spend the day with me. He was by then my mother had died 2 years earlier, and we were living at Butley, and I just started my balloon career, and I had bought a balloon which you can see there with him standing in it, and it was called the Green Dragon. And it was basically a second-hand one that I'd bought for a couple of £1,000, and it was silver and green, and because of the flames I call it the Green Dragon. And on this particular flight I was doing was going to be a solo flight, just training, a nice morning in Somerset, and Dad was there, and I persuaded him. He was reluctant to go in the balloon, and we drifted off to the southwest of the takeoff point at Lidford-on-Foss towards Cadbury, where they believe that King Arthur had his hill. King Arthur's point there. And I got a little lost talking to my dad. The retrieve was following us, and I didn't intend to do and leave my father in the balloon and walk off to a farm, but I'd got lost, and the balloonist couldn't see me. You can see it's quite hilly, and I'd gone low level, and about 200 yards away from this basket was a farmyard, and I thought the only way I could talk to my retrieve on the radio, because he couldn't see the inflated balloon, was to get to the farm, find out the name of the farm, and do that. So not good navigation on my part. So I left the balloon with my dad in it, and I didn't want it to deflate because I might have to take off again.
Oh, I see.
So I said to my dad, you can put your hand up and puff the balloon.
Give it off.
A count to 30 and then just give a little puff. And as I walked away, I turned around and watched him, and he looked at me as if to say, and he did say something then. He said, son, don't leave me too long. And in all the years, in all my life with my dad, he put me in harm's way in India, in the Middle East. He always, gave me that thing. And it wasn't then that I thought, my God, I can't leave him like that. What if he takes off? what if he keeps on? I'm going to lose my dad, and people would accuse me of it. And I ran to the farm, saw somebody in the yard, and said, where are we? And he gave me it, and I found it on the Ordnance Survey map and ran back to him. But just before I left him, he just said that to me. It's a poignant picture. I got a lot of ballooning pictures, but that one I'll always remember.
Yeah, it's nice, really nice.
And when he entered into a nursing home some years later in Australia, and he wasn't going to survive another 4 or 5 months, and I'd gone along to see him, and he knew that I was keen to get back to England. I had a job offered, and I said, Dad, I could be some time to get back. And he said, don't worry about it, we've had good fun. And I left him, and I knew I wouldn't see him again. And also, on my ejection from the Hunter when I was in a burns ward, he came to see me and stood by my bed with a Jaguar thing in 1978, 79, and he stood next to the bed and he said to me, "Son, you've had enough. You know, you should quit now while you're ahead. You know, just you're lucky to survive." But I basically never agreed with him.
You never listened to him.
I always, you know, he'd been through the war. He'd seen people die. He'd been in North Africa. He'd been shot up by a Messerschmitt 109 in the desert, and you know, he'd basically seen war and what it did to people.
Yeah.
And I think he was always worried that it was going to kill me. But hey, I'm still alive.
There you go. Yeah, it's a nice picture to end on.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that and those pictures. I mean, there's loads of them, and I think we will come back with a filmed version and go around the hangar where you can cover some more of the ballooning and other bits, because there's so many stories to tell. But in the hut at Middlezoy, we've got so much stuff on the wall.
Yeah.
It'd be quite interesting to go around, but that's for the future anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks for your 6 aviation images. And on that note, we shall leave you for now.
Well, good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Rick. Bye.
Bye.